Superman has taken over theaters, and today we're going to tell you everything you would ever want to know about the Man of Steel with the ultimate history of Superman. What's up, my comic comrades? The first cinematic installment in James Gunn's new DCU finally arrived this past weekend when Superman landed in theaters on July 11th. So we've partnered with our friends at B&B Theaters to bring you the most extensive breakdown of Superman's history you've ever seen, including the evolution of Kal-El's origin story, his most important story arcs, a look at his iconic rogues gallery, most memorable battles, Soup's impact on TV and movies over the years, and a lot more. We're also excited to be back here at B&B Theaters' awesome North Richland Hills location, which has a ton of incredible ways to experience the Superman movie, and a little later we'll give you guys a tour so you can see for yourself. But we've got a ton of ground to cover first, so let's get to it with the evolution of Superman's origin story. Up, and away. Superman was created in 1938 by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster. They met at Glendale High School in 1931 when they were both about 16 years old. The two of them loved adventure stories, sci-fi, and comic strips. So in 1933, Siegel and Shuster would write a short story called Reign of the Superman. It told the story of a bald man that wanted to use his telepathic abilities to take over the world. Now, the Superman we would come to know would be very different from this and be a force for good, not evil. But the bald madman wouldn't go away completely. It would just take a new form being reworked into Superman's arch nemesis Lex Luthor, but let me not get ahead of myself. You see, shortly after Reign of the Superman, Siegel and Shuster decided Superman should be a hero instead of a villain, with a completely different power set, modeling his abilities after the likes of Samson and Hercules. But that wouldn't be the only thing that differed this time around. Superman would now also be a refugee from an alien planet. They would also give him the outfit of strongman at the time, mixed with a circus acrobat outfit. And of course, give him the secret identity, Clark Kent, the mild-mannered reporter. With this reworked version of Superman, Siegel and Shuster would try to get Superman published as a comic strip, but were met with no's from every major newspaper and publisher, as they all thought the concept would be too juvenile and that the masses would not want to read about a man in a colorful costume who was bulletproof and could do superhuman things. But by 1935, Siegel and Shuster found ongoing work in comic books, which was a fairly new medium at the time that expanded on many of the characters and stories found in newspaper comic strips. They worked on titles like Spy, Slam Bradley, and more, all for National Allied Publishing, which would later turn into DC Comics after its most successful title, Detective Comics. But when 1938 came around, DC needed a new lead feature for their new anthology series, Action Comics, and they decided to take a chance on Superman. So on April 18th of 1938, Superman was introduced to the world in Action Comics issue 1. Now, although Action Comics number 1 is cover dated as June 1938, it hit stands on April 18th, 1938. But the point is, when it hit stands, it was a success, and Superman would quickly gain a massive fan base. So much so, he was given his own self-titled series 1 year later in the summer of 1939. Now, that's some background to Superman's real-world origin, but now let's take a look at his fictional one. Superman's origin is arguably the most well-known origin in fiction, predating other extremely well-known characters' origins, such as Batman and Spider-Man. Now, we are given Superman's origin on the very first page of Action Comics issue 1, and though similar, it wasn't the iconic origin we would come to know, which I'm gonna read to you verbatim because they gave it to us in just a handful of panels. As soon as we open up Superman's first appearance in Action Comics 1, we are given his origin as it says, Superman by Jerome Siegel and Joe Shuster. As captions say, a distant planet was destroyed by old age. A scientist placed his infant son with a hastily devised spaceship, launching it towards Earth. When the vehicle landed on Earth, a passing motorist, discovering the sleeping bag within, turned the child over to an orphanage. Attendants, unaware of the child's physical strength was millions of years advance of their own, were astounded at the feats of strength. When maturity was reached, he discovered he could easily leap 1/8 of a mile, hurdle a 20-story building, raise tremendous weights, run faster than an express train, and that nothing less than a bursting shell could penetrate his skin. Early Clark decided that he must turn his titanic strength into channels that would benefit mankind, and so was created Superman, champion of the oppressed, the physical marvel who had sworn to devote his existence to helping those in need. Then on the last panel of the first page, it says a scientific explanation of Clark Kent's amazing strength. Then explains that when Clark reached adulthood, he became gifted with titanic strength. Now, as I'm sure you could tell, this original origin later changed and evolved into his iconic one, with the two standout differences being that Clark's ship would land in Smallville, Kansas, and John and Martha Kent would take him in as their own instead of a random motorist finding him and taking him to an orphanage. And then also the fact that it's Earth's yellow sun that gives Clark his powers, and not just when Kryptonians reach adulthood, they become strong. His origin was updated by Siegel and Shuster a year later in 1939 in the debut issue of Superman's self-titled series. It's here they would introduce John and Martha Kent, who would adopt Clark after he was rocketed to Earth. However, it still wasn't what we know now, as both John and Martha would pass away in his adulthood, and their death was the catalyst that strengthened the determination growing in Clark's mind, leading him to decide he must use his strength to benefit mankind, thus becoming Superman. Over time, Superman origin would continue to evolve and still continues to evolve, but in More Fun Comics Volume 1, Issue 101 from 1945, we were given the first full appearance of Krypton in its Superboy story. It also gives us the detailed iconic origin we're most familiar with today, detailing the events of what Superman's parents Jor-El and Laura-El went through. We also get a more detailed look at the Kents taking in baby Clark and how he slowly discovers his powers before becoming Superboy. Now, as far as Superman's origin in the modern era, Mark Waid's Superman Birthright from 2003 to 2004 is widely regarded as the best modern retelling of Superman's origin. The entire first issue does a fantastic job recapping and detailing what Superman's birth parents Jor-El and Laura-El went through getting ready to launch their only child to another planet before their dying planet exploded. And once on Earth, we see a great updated look at Clark Kent's backstory, integrating real-world journalism and culture while still keeping that original, mythical, hopeful, inspiring tone of Superman. It also does one of the best jobs at exploring Clark's struggle with his identity. You really get to see Clark try to figure out and balance his alien heritage, but also his humanity. And then on the flip side of that, his reporter everyday lifestyle versus being the Man of Steel, a superhero. Ultimately, Superman's origin over the decades has become so ingrained in pop culture that by the time 2006 came around, when Grant Morrison and Frank Quitely teamed up for All-Star Superman, which is now widely considered one of the best Superman stories ever written, Morrison and Quitely were able to effectively summarize Superman's origin with just 4 panels and 8 words on the very first page of All-Star Superman issue 1, which simply said, "Doomed planet, desperate scientist, last hope, kindly couple," with Frank Quitely adding panels that encapsulate each perfectly. It really demonstrates just how embedded Superman's origin story has become into modern pop culture, not just here in the United States, but around the world. Now that wraps up our overview of Superman's famous origin story and how it's expanded over the years. However, a major piece of Big Blue's life that is set to play a prominent role in the Superman movie, but often doesn't get enough love, is his home away from home, the Fortress of Solitude. So we're going to look at what the fortress really is and why it's such an important place for Kal-El. But first, I also promise you a tour of this incredible theater, and I'm a man of my word. This is actually one of B&B Theater's newer locations in the DFW area, and like all B&B theaters, it's got an amazing mix of viewing and entertainment options. For starters, you could have food delivered right to your seat from their full-service restaurant, Sterling's, while you watch The Man of Steel in their massive dine-in grand screen theater. And if you're looking for something to wash it down, they also have the Marquee Bar, which offers an extensive selection of both imported and local beers. But what makes the B&B experience the best in the industry is that they not only offer you a variety of amazing movie viewing experiences, they also keep the party going before and after the movie, with things like a great outdoor lounge and lawn game area where you can hang out with your friends and family, and a bunch more. In fact, each B&B location is a bit different, and some even have full bowling alleys and pickleball courts, among other great options. It's just a dope place to hang out, and it's all driven by B&B's goal to give audiences the best entertainment experience possible, which is why they're celebrating 100 years of movie magic this year. So do yourself a favor and grab your tickets for Superman at bnbtheaters.com. They have locations all over the country, so just head over to bnbtheaters.com or click the link in the description to find a B&B theater near you for those Superman showtimes. Now let's keep the Superman train rolling with a look at his Fortress of Solitude. The Fortress of Solitude first appeared in Action Comics 241 in 1958. It is often located in the Arctic, away from civilization. The best way to look at it is Superman's version of the Batcave. It's Superman's base of operations made in the Arctic out of Kryptonian technology. In the Fortress of Solitude, depending on what iteration of the character or continuity you're referring to, Superman can do such things as talk to his father via Kryptonian AI or archive videos and intelligence. But he uses it for all kinds of things, as it's his remote hideaway where he stores Kryptonian technology, safeguards dangerous artifacts, and even conducts experiments. He also has a medical bay where he could operate and heal himself from injuries as well as others. But it also serves as a memorial to Krypton. Most notably, this is also where he keeps the Phantom Zone projector, an extra dimension interdimensional prison that lives outside of the space and time void, where Superman sends the evilest of foes. The fortress is also where he keeps the bottled city of Kandor. Kandor being a Kryptonian city that the villain Brainiac shrunk and put in a bottle. Superman was able to retrieve it, and he keeps it in the fortress until he could figure out a way to unshrink his fellow Kryptonians. Superman also has several robot assistants at the fortress that help him maintain it and take care of the sentient life that he keeps there, as Superman also has a zoo of sorts there where he keeps endangered species from around the universe. The fortress also has an armory that stores weapons and artifacts. Artifacts Superman has confiscated from villains and beings too dangerous to fall back into villains' hands. He also has weapons of his own that he stores there for any given situation, as well as a mini Justice League headquarters in case the Justice League ever needed to use it. And much like Batman has a trophy room where he keeps his weapons, relics, and all sorts of stuff, so does Superman. In fact, we see in All-Star Superman that Superman retrieved the Titanic from the ocean and keeps it in the Fortress of Solitude. He also has a gigantic Joker penny, something he's had in the fortress since the very beginning, as we see this Joker penny in the Fortress of Solitude's very first appearance in Action Comics 241. Another thing we learned in the first appearance of the Fortress of Solitude, and something that more or less stays consistent throughout the history of Superman, is that he has a massive golden key to get in. He is the only one strong enough to lift it, and in some versions the key is made from a dwarf star, which is the size of a normal key, but yet again it's so heavy only Superman can lift it. In summary, the Fortress of Solitude has everything from Kryptonian archives, healing chambers, laboratories, trophy rooms, to interdimensional portals, and everything in between. And the version we see in the movie is not only comic accurate, but it also set up to be a growing piece for Superman's story as the DCU expands. Okay, so we covered the evolution of Soup's well-known origins and now his Kryptonian-designed fortress, which leads us to another major piece of what makes Superman the iconic figure that he's become, and that is his powers and abilities. They're easily as well known and recognizable as his origin and the symbol on his chest, but they have also evolved quite a bit over the years, including a couple of big changes just recently. So let's see what makes Kal-El the Man of Steel. First and foremost, let's start with Superman's super strength. Superman is assumed to have limitless power. For instance, in All-Star Superman, where he absorbed too much solar radiation, the upper limits of his strength couldn't even be measured. Superman has been shown to be so powerful, his sneeze destroyed an entire solar system. He's also been shown to tow several planets linked together by an incredibly strong chain. There's really no limit to Superman's strength, as it's often shown to be limitless or rise to the occasion needed. Then of course he's nearly invulnerable. He's resistant to explosions, nukes, black holes, bullets, pretty much anything you could throw at him isn't going to hurt him. He could even survive in space and deep water without any protection or assistance of a device. We also know he could fly, and depending on the iteration, he could fly at supersonic or faster than light speed. Hell, there's been versions of him where he could fly between dimensions and galaxies. Supes also has freeze breath. He's able to blow extremely cold air that is able to turn people to ice. And not only that, he has wind gust breath. He could blow gusts so powerful they are tornado or hurricane level force winds. Of course, the Man of Steel also has super hearing. He could basically hear everyone on Earth at any given moment and actually has to tune them out. But he could also hear radio waves, heartbeats across entirely different countries, or even cries from space. He's also got supervision, having incredibly good sight, being able to see things miles away with his telescopic vision. But it doesn't stop there, because he also has microscopic vision, as well as being able to see things down to a molecular level. For example, in All-Star Superman, he said he could see his white blood cells dying. But if you thought those were the only two visions he had, you'd be wrong, because he has infrared and night vision as well. He could see in complete darkness, and of course, he has his very famous X-ray vision, being able to see through any material except lead. The last son of Krypton could also move incredibly fast. He's just a little bit slower than the fastest man alive, the Flash. In fact, he was recently shown to be so fast he could vibrate his molecules at such a speed he could phase through walls. In fact, this was recently shown in Action Comics 1053 when he phases through Lex Luthor's cell wall. On top of all that, Superman has a healing factor, and the more sunlight he's exposed to, the faster he heals. He could be on death's door, but if he's left in sunlight, he will heal. However, something that people often don't talk about when talking about Superman's powers and abilities is that he's a genius. He's one of the smartest minds in the DC universe. He has a photographic memory, advanced understanding of alien tech, and is proficient in several languages languages, engineering, and most science. Which is to be expected since Superman's brain functions way faster than ordinary humans, so he could process a huge amount of data in seconds. He could think through multiple scenarios in an instant and could read and learn almost anything incredibly fast. Now, as we all know, all of Superman's powers are given to him by the Earth's yellow sun. Effectively, Superman is a solar battery, and the more sun he has, the more powerful he becomes. Although, as shown in All-Star Superman, if he absorbs too much yellow sun at once, it could lead to his death, overcharging him. Now, like all comic book characters, Superman has gone through power changes, upgrades, and so on and so forth throughout the years. And in 2015, Superman was given the solar flare in Superman 38 as part of the New 52. This new ability allows Superman to release stored up solar energy from his cells at once in an explosive blast, basically turning him into a solar bomb. It is incredibly destructive and powerful. The only problem is, after he uses it, he's essentially powerless for 24 hours until his body recharges. We also saw recently in Action Comics 1054 from 2024 that Superman now has the capability of making a Susanoo. For those of you who don't know what a Susanoo is, it's an extremely powerful chakra-based ability. It manifests as a giant humanoid avatar made of the user's chakra. It surrounds them as a force of energy, acting as a shield or device of immense force. And Superman got one in Action Comics 1054. Most recently in Superman Unlimited, Dan Slott gave Superman yet another upgrade, giving him a golden form teased at the end of Superman Unlimited issue 1. We find out in issue 2 of Superman Unlimited that this new golden form activates when he sustained extreme damage, and once in this golden form, he's completely immune to kryptonite. That's right, Superman is immune to kryptonite, at least in this golden form. But the catch is, it only lasts for 3 minutes, and once the 3 minutes run out, he temporarily loses all of his powers completely. So it's a cool temporary boost, but after the 3 minutes are up, it actually becomes a weakness, so it's an interesting concept. Okay, so we've laid out Superman's well-known power set and how it's evolved over the years, but we're gonna really nail it down with a handful of instances where he demonstrated just how powerful he really is. Starting with Superman Volume 3, Issue 13, where he placed himself inside a machine that duplicated the weight of Earth, which for any of you wondering is 5.97 sextillion tons. Anyway, he then proceeded to bench press the weight for 5 days straight, and after all that, he literally just dropped a single drop of sweat. But here's the craziest part, Superman hadn't even reached his limit. He had to stop because the machine reached its limit. His strength is absolutely crazy, and it reminds me of a recent scene in Tom Taylor's Detective Comics run, issue 1095 to be exact, where Bruce is brooding in his Batcave after learning some crazy news when an alarm goes off and notifies Batman of a heavy increasing force being applied to the front gate of Wayne Manor. It starts at 1 ton of pressure and quickly goes to 23 tons, which tells Batman that it's Clark coming in for a visit. In fact, on the following page, we see Clark dressed in his suit standing at the gate, and he just nonchalantly applied 23 tons of pressure to the front gate of Wayne Manor without much effort. However, for our next example, we've got to jump back to the 90s when Superman and Doomsday fought each other to a mutual death. I mean, Superman did technically win the fight in that he was able to stop Doomsday, but the injuries he suffered in the battle cost him his life as well. But fast forward to a number of years later, because when the two fought in the New 52, Superman demonstrated a whole new level of strength and power as he was able to rip the monster in half with his bare hands. And before you think that Doomsday may have been weakened, remember that Doomsday gets stronger every time he's reborn. In fact, prior to Superman ripping him to shreds, this version of Doomsday was able to break both of Wonder Woman's arms with a single punch, and then powered up even further before facing Superman. So it's yet another incredible demonstration of Superman's strength. But his feats of strength go way beyond that. For example, in one instance in Action Comics 273, Superman's sneeze destroyed an entire solar system. Or how about the time in JLA 77 where Superman contained a miniature black hole in his hand? Yes, you heard that correctly. Some crazy scientists managed to create a small black hole within a magnetic containment device, and when the device started to come apart, Superman just wrapped his hands around it to prevent the entire solar system from getting sucked in. You know, as one does. And if that's not enough for you, Superman once even sealed tears in space and time with his heat vision. There was a tear in reality caused by an ancient deity, so Superman just sealed those tears with his heat vision because, well, he can. But the last feat we'll add is when Superman fought his counterpart from another universe at the end of the Crisis on Infinite Earths story. Their battle was so intense that each blow was altering reality. As the comic says, the struggles between us has shattered the boundaries of space and time. Every time we connect, I'm transported to his world, living his life. The punches between them are so powerful that each blow causes damage to reality itself. That is absolutely crazy. But believe me when I tell you, that is just the tip of the iceberg iceberg. Over the years, Superman has moved planets, ripped Highfather's staff from the source wall, thrown opponents through space and time, shattered Green Lantern's constructs, and much, much more. And when you put it all together, you see why Superman is the apex superhero, the one all other superheroes look to when all hope seems to be lost, and the one all DC villains fear the most. And speaking of villains, you can't have a strong superhero without a solid rogues gallery, and Superman is no exception. So let's take a look at who his most iconic villains are. Let's start off with Superman's arch nemesis and by far his most iconic villain, which is Lex Luthor. Lex is an egomaniac and one of the smartest men on Earth. Lex looks at Superman like a cheat code. He hates Superman because he could do anything, and he's jealous of that. He also thinks humanity's livelihood should not be in the hands of an alien. He wishes he could be the savior of Earth, and because he's not, he's envious of Superman, and his ego can't stand that everyone loves Supes and that Superman has abilities to do almost anything. Lex is a very complex villain, and one of the things I like most about him is that in truth, he's scared of Superman, and because of this, he's trying to think of a way to take him down. Lex sees Superman as a challenge that must be terminated to prove his worth, while simultaneously eliminating his fear. James Gunn said it best in a recent interview that Lex Luthor looks at Superman like AI. He thinks Superman will make humanity weak and reliant on him, eventually giving him complete and total power of everything. Lex is all like, we can't use this cheat code, be reliant on this thing that could help us in situations. We need to learn to do things on our own. We need to be better. I need to be better to prove to myself and everyone else that this alien isn't the savior. I am. So in essence, Luthor, at least in the new Superman movie, looks at Superman as print artists look at AI. Next up, we have Doomsday. Doomsday is the complete and utter opposite of Lex Luthor. He is a mindless killing machine just as strong as the Man of Steel. Doomsday is a force of nature. He is the one who infamously killed Superman back in 1992, showing us that Doomsday and Superman fighting is truly what happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object. Unlike Luthor, there is no intellect, complexities, or strategy to Doomsday's chaos. He is simply created to cause death around him. He has no emotion, no morality, he just kills whatever's in his way. Which is fun and awesome in a completely different way, because who doesn't like to see just pure raw destruction for no rhyme or reason? If for nothing else, because it's fun to watch. Now, more recently in the current Superman comics, Doomsday has evolved into the Time Trapper, and he's asking Superman to kill him one more time in order for Doomsday to finally reach his god form. You see, the insane thing about Doomsday is you cannot kill him the same way twice, and every time you kill him, he comes back to life stronger than before. So after several deaths over the years, he believes his next death will resurrect him as a god. No matter how you slice it, Doomsday is easily top 5, maybe even top 3 Superman villains of all time. Again, he's the dude that killed Superman. Next up, we have General Zod. Zod is a fellow Kryptonian with radically different beliefs and values. While Superman's belief is to protect all of humanity and life, believing that he can inspire them to be better through compassion and hope, Zod believes survival of the fittest. And the only thing he cares about is bringing Krypton back. He wants his Kryptonian race to thrive yet again, and in a lot of iterations wants to turn Earth into the new Krypton. This was one of the main premises of the Man of Steel movie. He's also a fantastic villain because he's almost as strategic and complex as a character as Lex Luthor is, but he has all the powers of Superman, being a fellow Kryptonian. In a lot of ways, one could argue Zod is more dangerous than Superman in the sense that he's better trained. He was the general of the Kryptonian army. Because of this, he's a fierce combatant with amazing strategic skills. However, General Zod's rage and focus on nothing but restoring Krypton as a dominant force in the galaxy often blinds him and acts as a weakness. But keeping this villain train rolling, we have yet another fan favorite, Brainiac. You'd be hard pressed to find someone who's never heard of Brainiac. Depending on what depiction of the character you're talking about, he was an artificial intelligence that resided on Krypton, or an alien from another world that's shrinking cities around the world so he could one day restore the one he came from. Or he could be a robot disguised as an alien to infiltrate other civilizations. He's had lots of iterations. But no matter how you slice it, Brainiac is easily one of Superman's oldest and most powerful enemies. He's also one of, if not the smartest, having a 12th level intellect. He uses his advanced techno-organic technology to go around the multiverse shrinking civilizations, keeping them in a bottle to add to his twisted collection of captured worlds. He's responsible for more extinction in the DC multiverse than almost any other being. He's a mixture of brains, bronze, and advanced technology, which makes him one of Superman's most deadly adversaries. adversaries. Then of course we have the imperfect Superman clone, Bizarro. Bizarro is a tragic villain because in a lot of ways what he does isn't necessarily his fault. He's like a child or someone with a disability that just can't comprehend things as a capable adult could. Because of that, he often makes terrible choices that put people in grave danger. Now whether what he's doing is his fault or not, it still makes him a foe for Superman because Superman has to make sure he's not being manipulated or tricked into doing something that's going to cause harm. Or because of the fact that because Bizarro feels alone and is suffering wishing people loved him like they love Superman, he lashes out like a kid having a temper tantrum, but with the power of Superman. Bizarro is one of my favorites. I loved him since his appearance in the 90s Superman the Animated Series, where he was portrayed perfectly. They captured that tragic, childlike innocence of Bizarro just wanting to be accepted. It's also just really cool to see Superman fight a twisted backwards version of himself, which makes for some great battles. Next up we have Mr. Mix-Yes-Spitlick. Mr. Mix-Yes-Spitlick is easily one of, if not the most powerful Superman villain. He's a fifth-dimensional imp who can warp reality to his will and pretty much do whatever he wants, whenever he wants. He simply finds Superman amusing and often challenges Superman as a form of entertainment, usually causing chaos in Superman's life until Superman can't trick him into saying his name backwards, which banishes him. As I'll get into more in story arcs, in the Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow storyline, Mr. Mix-Yes-Spitlick was the main villain behind all the things going wrong in Superman's life, showing himself as the ultimate Superman villain for the Silver Age Superman, the final story in which Superman ultimately had to kill him to stop him. Moving on, we have Lobo. Lobo was such a good character. When Stan Lee was asked if he could create any DC character, who would it be? He responded Lobo. And the reason why Lobo was such a great Superman villain is because he represents everything Superman is not. So the contrast makes for some great storytelling. We all know Superman is compassionate, selfless, and has very strong moral code, and is a symbol of hope. Lobo, on the other hand, not so much. He's violent, selfish, loud, and really only does things that benefits him. He's a murderous bounty hunter who will do almost anything for some money and fun. But he's also a physical match for Superman. He's basically indestructible. He has an insane healing factor and is just as strong as the Man of Steel. He's a character that pushes Superman to his limits without the use of magic or kryptonite, which is really cool. Lobo is basically the best of both worlds, so you have characters like Luthor, who for the most part fights Superman with his intellect, then you have characters like Doomsday, who use their brute force, but Lobo is somewhere in the middle. He does use some strategy, but he's also a physical match for Superman, mixed in with an amoral punk rock, I'm just here to have a good time attitude. Now jumping to another great Superman villain, of course I had to mention Darkseid. Darkseid is one of the most well-known and powerful villains in all of the DC universe, and while he's also known as a Justice League villain, he is most certainly a Superman villain as well. He is mostly a Superman villain because Darkseid sees Superman as one of, if not the biggest threats and obstacles in his universal quest of domination. You see, anyone who knows anything about Darkseid knows he just wants one thing, the anti-life equation, because with it, he can control all free will, and in turn, control the multiverse. But Superman obviously is not going to let that happen, giving us one of the best rivalries in comics. So while Darkseid is indeed more of a universal threat, often clashing with superhero teams, most notably the Justice League, having countless epic battles with them, he also solo clashes with the Man of Steel, because if there's one being in the universe who can stop the new god, it is obviously the last son of Krypton. Now there's a few other Superman villains I at least have to mention, like Parasite, who is a massive threat for Superman, as Superman has to make sure he doesn't absorb his powers or any energy around him, which in turn would just make him stronger and stronger and more of a threat. There's also Metallo, who has a kryptonite heart, which is quite literally Superman's weakness, so for obvious reasons, he's a great villain for Superman. Then of course we have Cyborg Superman, Toyman, Livewire, another one of my favorites from Superman the Animated Series, Silver Banshee, Ultraman, and Evil Superman from Earth 3, and so on and so forth. But with villains out of the way, it's time to move on to Superman's story arcs. Alright, since Superman has been around since 1938, almost 100 years, he has more amazing stories than probably any other superhero in fiction. But let's talk about a handful of ones that are the most widely regarded amongst the fandom. First and foremost, of course, we have All-Star Superman, widely regarded by many as the best Superman story ever told. It was written by Grant Morrison and drawn by Frank Quitely. We actually just broke down this story in its entirety, which you could watch right here. But in short, it deals with Superman dying by the very thing that gives Superman his power: Earth's yellow sun. Essentially, Lex Luthor tricks Superman to save a man's sun mission, which means Superman basically has to fly above the surface of the sun. This causes Superman's cells to become oversaturated with solar radiation, more solar radiation than his cells are able to process, to the point that Superman's cells start killing themselves, meaning Superman doesn't have too long to live. Superman, knowing this, tries to leave Earth in the best possible place he can before he dies. It really explores Superman's ability to perform impossible feats, but also highlights his kindness and heroism, showing showing the only thing he wants is to help save humanity, showing them they can be better even in the face of his own death. It's a classic, and if you're just going to read one Superman story, this is the one you should read. Another one of the greatest Superman stories ever told is Superman Birthright by Mark Waid and Lionel Francis Yu. I talked about this a bit ago in Origins, but like I said earlier, this is widely considered the best modern retelling of Superman's origin. The reason why the story is so good is because it gives us an excellent retelling of Superman's origin, starting with what his birth parents, Jor and Laura-El, went through on Krypton, and how even though they couldn't save themselves, they made sure they were able to save their one and only child, hoping he would find a good life on another world. Then we're brought to Clark in his youth and his young adulthood, seeing him struggle with who he is. Is he this alien from another world, or has he fully adopted humanity? And if he's both, how do you balance the two? But not only that, he has been gifted extraordinary powers on Earth because of the Earth's yellow sun. So does he use these abilities to be a superhero and help people in need? And if so, how does he balance that with his everyday life being a reporter? It's a very good look and take on the complexities of what it would be like to be Clark Kent / Superman. It also does such a good job focusing on his alien heritage and his Kryptonian legacy, being the last son of Krypton, but also his earthly persona and responsibilities as a journalist, inspiring empathy and hope. Again, not just a superhero, but as a journalist. We even get a reimagined take of Clark Kent and Lex Luthor's relationship, seeing Luthor's personal history with Kent. Much like I said earlier, the very theme of this book is identity, Clark's alien heritage versus his adoption of humanity, versus journalism versus superhero. It's a must read for sure. From here, we get another banger, because that's what we're talking about here, and I would be referring to The Man Who Has Everything from 1985, written by the great Alan Moore and drawn by the amazing Dave Gibbons. This story was so good it got adapted into an episode of Justice League Unlimited. The premise is simple. On Superman's birthday, his closest friends, Batman, Robin, and Wonder Woman, visit the Fortress of Solitude to give him birthday presents. The problem is, when they get there, they see Superman standing still motionless, like a zombie in some sort of hypnotic state, with the parasite alien plant called the Black Mercy attached to his chest. And as the story goes on, we find out this telepathic plant came from the villain Mongol. You see, how the Black Mercy plant works is it paralyzes its host while making them have a perfect dream. A dream that's tailored to its host's deepest desires. And while they're having this dream, the victim is fully immersed in thinking it's all real. And in Superman's case, his dream is that Krypton never exploded and he's married and has a son. His father is a respected scientist who's retired. Essentially, Superman is living the life he probably would have lived if Krypton didn't explode. As Krypton isn't a utopia, but it also isn't a disaster, giving us Superman's heart desires being a regular man with a family. Ultimately, Superman realizes that this is a dream and that the wife and son aren't real. So he abandoned his dream as his Kryptonian son fades away in his arms, and of course this pisses Superman off, and when he comes back to the real world, he's pretty mad and immediately finds Mongol. But when he does find him, we see Mongol holding Wonder Woman by the hair, but Superman just comes in with the flying punch, knocking him on the ground, saying, "Get up, you vermin. Do you understand what you did to me?" The two continue to battle, but in the end, Robin throws the Black Mercy on Mongol, putting him in a comatose dream state. And the issue ends with us seeing Mongol in his dream as everyone worships him. It's an amazing story that explores desire versus reality, as well as loss and grief, showing us that even Superman, the man who could do anything, still doesn't have the one thing he wants the most: a family. Next up, we have Superman Red Sun. This is probably the most iconic Elseworlds or alternate reality story for Superman. It's a 3-issue miniseries from 2003 written by Mark Miller with art by Dave Johnson and Killian Plunkett. The premise is really simple, yet it changes the whole course of Superman's existence. The premise is what would happen if Superman's rocket from Krypton landed in the Soviet Ukraine instead of Smallville, Kansas, showing us how much of a different Superman we would get, giving us a whole new take on what Superman's values, relationships, and even global politics would be. It's a story that shows you how much a person is influenced by their surroundings and environment. And in this version, Superman grows up in the Ukraine, so he's a loyal Soviet citizen, becoming the champion of Stalinism, being touted as the Soviet Superman. Now, obviously, if the Soviets have the most powerful being on their side, America and the US government are all like, hey, if the crap ever hits the fan and our countries go to war, we're screwed. So the US government turns to Lex Luthor, who's a brilliant American scientist, to try to come up with a countermeasure, a kryptonite so to speak, for the Soviet Superman. It's a fantastic story set in the 1950s Cold War and even got made into an animated movie. It's only 3 issues long. If you have not read it yet, I think you should. It's a self-contained story, so you only gotta read the 3 issues and you'll know everything. Anyway, next up is kind of a 3-part, if you will, and that's the death of Superman, funeral of a friend, and the reign of the Supermen. Now, the death of the Superman story arc is not just one of the most iconic Superman stories, it is one of the 10 most pivotal storylines and moments in comic book history. Up to that point, comics never really killed off heroes in that way. The death of Superman was so huge it made mainstream news. Everyone was talking about this, from news channels to late night talk shows. Now, I'm not gonna go into great detail with this because, again, it's such an iconic moment and story. We all know what went down. Doomsday arrives on Earth and inevitably fights Superman to the death. This then leads to the funeral for a friend storyline where in Metropolis, the world mourns the death of Superman. Lois Lane is absolutely crushed with the loss of her loved Superman. Meanwhile, Jonathan and Martha Kent are forced to mourn in private and pretend that Clark Kent, their son, is away on a special assignment, when in fact he was killed because he's Superman. Then of course other members of the Justice League like Batman, the Flash, Wonder Woman, and so on and so forth pay tribute to their fallen friend. Meanwhile, Lex Luthor is trying to capitalize on this because this is the perfect time for him to rise to even more power, and he also hates Superman, so he's glad he's dead. This would then culminate in the reign of the Supermen storyline, where 4 new Supermen rise to replace Supes such as Eradicator, Cyborg Superman, Superboy, and the Man of Steel, or Steel John Henrys. Long story short, the real Superman obviously comes back to life in a new black suit, which is his recovery suit, that helps him absorb more solar radiation to heal and get back to 100% faster, rocking that epic 90s mullet, having a party in the back and business up front. Moving along, we have the Superman for All Seasons. This is yet another epic 4-issue miniseries that, much like the title implies, shows Superman and or Clark Kent's journey from Smallville, Kansas to the Man of Tomorrow. It's a very character-driven story that shows the impact he has on every person around him and in his life. The thing that makes it so good is that it explores what makes Superman human, which is always the best thing to focus on when you're talking about the character. Because he's this alien who looks like a human, but is certainly not, and chooses to help humanity, embracing it, adopting its people when he doesn't have to. Hell, there's been a bunch of stories where other Kryptonians have made their way to Earth and tried to make it their new Krypton. But Superman is always the one like, no, these are my people, I will defend them. You cannot force your will on anyone. What also makes the series more interesting is that each issue is narrated by a different person in Clark or Superman's life. The first one is narrated by his Earth father Jonathan Kent, the second, the love of his life Lois Lane, the third, his enemy Lex Luthor, and the fourth, his first love Lana Lang. It's an amazing story and one that all diehard Superman fans must read to really understand the character, not to mention it's written by Jeff Loeb with amazing art by Tim Sale. And as promised, we have Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow, written by Alan Moore and drawn by classic Superman artist Kurt Swan. This is yet another Superman story that would be on the Mount Rushmore of Superman stories. It tells the final story of Silver Age Superman, really bookending Superman's story much like All-Star Superman. We actually broke down this story in its entirety 2 months ago here on the channel. But as far as a summary of the story, it's a send-off to Silver Age Superman. Pre-Crisis Superman before DC rebooted continuity with Crisis on Infinite Earths. So because of that, like I briefly mentioned, it's framed as the last Superman story told as a retrospective tale through Lois Lane, who is now married and retired 10 years after Superman's disappearance. And she's telling the final days of Superman to a reporter, and the crazy thing is, it's only a 2-issue series that takes place in Superman 423 and Action Comics 583. Essentially what happens is a bunch of Superman's greatest enemies start attacking him and the ones closest to him, with way more violence than usual. Bizarro straight up goes insane and even kills himself after destroying a ton of buildings. Toyman and Prankster torture and murder Pete Ross, so since all of his foes are trying to kill his closest friends and loved ones, Superman brings them to the Fortress of Solitude for protection. Ultimately, Brainiac kills and takes over Lex Luthor's body. Brainiac, then thinking he's the one who's supposed to kill Superman at the end, actually ends up getting defeated. And the big reveal is that Mr. Mixyas Spitlick is the one responsible for everything, which is not shocking as he's a 5th-dimensional imp capable of almost anything. Essentially, we find out that Mr. Mixyas Spitlick has grown tired and bored of his mischief, so he decides to turn full-on malevolent. Superman, of course, is able to trick him yet again to say his name backwards, while inside a interdimensional transporter that kills him. This leaves Superman horrified that he broke his no-kill rule, then willingly exposes himself to gold kryptonite, which permanently removes his powers. Because of this, Superman is presumed dead, but in the epilogue, we find out that he's not dead, but in fact the person married to Lois Lane. And in the present, he's disguised under the new alias of Jordan Elliott. Essentially, Clark chose to give up his powers and let the world believe that Superman died. That way, he could live a peaceful, normal life with Lois Lane once and for all. They even have a son named Jonathan who is hinted to have superpowers as the comic ends. Now, I can go on and on with amazing Superman stories, but I'm just going to do some honorable mentions before we move on, such as Kingdom Come, The Injustice story, World of New Krypton, and Exile.
Okay, so now that Eris has covered all of the story arcs, one of the major things all these amazing and important Superman story arcs have given us over the years are the many alternate versions of the Man of Steel. We've also already talked about how and why Superman is more than just a superhero. He's a symbol of hope, justice, and the best of humanity. But what happens when you change his origin, his environment, or even his moral compass? That's where the alternate versions come in, offering us a chance to explore the what-ifs of his character. From heroic presidents and dark tyrants to samurai warriors and cyborgs, these stories spanning pre-crisis, post-crisis, and Elseworlds highlight how different circumstances can shape the last son of Krypton into something entirely new. So let's dive into the DC multiverse and take a closer look at a few of the alternate faces of Kal-El. But before diving into the wild world of alternate realities, let's start with the basics. In the early days of DC Comics, there were two main versions of Superman: the Golden Age Superman from Earth 2 and the Silver Age Superman from Earth 1. Golden Age Superman, Kal-El from Earth 2, is the original Superman, debuting in Action Comics #1 in 1938. He became a member of the Justice Society and eventually married Lois Lane and settled down. Overall, he's a more grounded human version of the character, reflecting the simpler storytelling of the 1940s. But then we have Silver Age Superman, which is the Kal-El from Earth 1. And starting in the 1950s, this version went on to become the one most fans know today. With his iconic red and blue suit, he fought alongside the Justice League and faced off against classic villains like Lex Luthor and Brainiac. Essentially, this is the Superman of the modern era, with his powers dialed up and his stories becoming more and more complex all the time. And with that understood, these two versions from the pre-crisis era, with their Earth 2 and Earth 1 distinctions, set the stage for the concept of the multiverse, where different Earths could have their own versions of Superman. Then, after the Crisis on Infinite Earths event in 1985, DC Comics streamlined their universe. But the idea of alternate realities didn't disappear, it expanded. So now let's look at some of the most iconic alternate Supermen from the multiverse, each offering a unique twist on the character. First up, we have Kingdom Come Superman from Earth 22. In this future-set story, Superman has retired after the death of Lois Lane, only to be drawn back into action by Wonder Woman. This version is older, wiser, and more powerful, having absorbed decades of yellow sunlight. He's also more jaded, having seen a new generation of heroes who are more violent and less idealistic. However, despite that, his return to heroism depicted in Kingdom Come is an amazing reminder of what Superman stands for, even in a world that's lost its way. Next up is Superboy Prime from Earth Prime. He is a tragic figure who comes from a world without superheroes, where he was the only one with powers. Then, after being pulled into the main DC universe during Crisis on Infinite Earths, he became increasingly unhinged, blaming the destruction of his world on the heroes who couldn't save it. His story, as detailed in events like Infinite Crisis and Dark Knight's Death Metal, is a cautionary tale of what happens when power isn't tempered by responsibility. Next, we have a character we already mentioned in the Superman's Enemies segment, but I'm talking about Ultraman from Earth 3, who is playing a major role in the new Superman movie. Now, we've already seen the movie, so we know how James Gunn uses him, but we're not going to spoil that here. However, in the comics, Ultraman is the evil counterpart to Superman and a member of the Crime Syndicate, which is a villainous version of the Justice League. He's actually powered by kryptonite and weaker in sunlight, and his moral code is as twisted as the world he comes from. So everything about him is the inverse of Superman. Altogether, Ultraman, who first appeared in Justice League of America issue 29 in 1964, represents the dark side of Superman's potential, showing what he could become if he embraced his power for selfish ends. But that isn't the case when it comes to Calvin Ellis Superman from Earth 23. Introduced in Action Comics Volume 2 issue 9 from 2012, Calvin Ellis was the first African-American version of Superman and leads a team called Justice Incarnate. But he is also the acting president of the United States, landing him the nickname President Superman. Overall, this version shows Superman as a symbol of leadership and unity on a global scale, and played off contemporary political and social themes at that time. And that leads us to Val-Zod from Earth 2. In the New 52's version of Earth 2, Superman is Val-Zod, a Kryptonian raised by Jor-El and Lara after his parents, Zod and Feora, were killed. Val-Zod would later become Superman and fight against an evil clone of Kal-El, but this alternate version of Superman, which was introduced in Earth 2 issue 19 in 2014, highlights diversity in the Superman mythos while staying true to the character's core values of hope and justice. On the flip side of that, however, is one of the darkest alternate versions of Big Blue, and that would be Overman from Earth 10. Overman is a Superman that was raised by Nazi Germany. So yeah, it doesn't get darker than that. Essentially, his ship landed in Germany in 1938, and he was adopted by Adolf Hitler himself, who used Kryptonian technology to win World War II. Overman then became the champion of the Fourth Reich, but he's haunted by guilt over the atrocities committed in his name. This version, detailed in issue 52 of the 52 series in 2007, and the Multiversity Mastermen #1 in 2015, explores the terrifying what-if of Superman if he were used as a tool of oppression. Which is honestly a good place for us to move to some of DC Elseworlds' alternates of Superman, because the Elseworlds imprint allowed for even more creative takes on the character. Why? Because it's totally free from the constraints of main continuity. As a result, these stories feature some of the most imaginative and thought-provoking versions of the Man of Steel, like Red Sun Superman from 2003, which again is another story we already talked briefly about back in Story Arcs. But to recap, in the miniseries, which is actually titled Superman Red Sun, Kal-El's ship lands in Soviet Ukraine instead of Kansas. Then raised by the Soviet Union, he becomes a symbol of communism, and the story explores how this upbringing shapes his values. Essentially, this version flips the Cold War on its head, with Superman as a Soviet hero and Lex Luthor as an American capitalist. Overall, it's a thought-provoking look at how environment influences character. The same is true of Shogun of Steel Superman. In JLA Shogun of Steel from 1992, Superman's ship lands in 14th century Japan, where he's raised as a samurai. Known as Tekahito or Hoshi, he fights against the tyrant Brainiac who rules Japan. Now this version blends Superman's alien heritage with feudal Japanese culture, creating a unique and visually epic take on the character, with a focus on honor and resistance. But we're gonna go much darker for the next alternate, and I'm talking about a Superman raised on Apocalypse by Darkseid. That's right, in Superman the Darkseid from 1998, Kal-El is enhanced by apocalyptic technology and molded into a weapon of destruction. However, he eventually turns against Darkseid, showing that even in the darkest circumstances, Superman's inherent goodness can shine through, ultimately giving us a narrative of redemption and resistance as well. But what about the versions of Supes that don't find their way back from the edge? Yes, some alternate versions of Superman cross the line from hero to villain and give us some of the most unnerving glimpses of what he could become, especially in morally complex scenarios. And nothing better defines that scenario than Injustice Superman. In the Injustice series, starting with Injustice Gods Among Us from 2013, Superman is tricked into killing Lois Lane and their unborn child by the Joker. Then, driven by grief and rage, he becomes an absolute tyrant, ruling with an iron fist and executing criminals without trial. This crazy and quite popular version of the Man of Steel shows the dark side of Superman when his moral code is abandoned and his seemingly limitless power is left unchecked, which also raises interesting questions about the limits of heroism and the impact of trauma. Now, the next alternate Superman on our list is not exactly a villain, but Bizarro is an imperfect duplicate of Superman. Known for his backward speech and actions, Bizarro is really a tragic figure who struggles to understand his own existence. The character first appeared in Superboy 68 in 1958, and over time became a mirror to Superman, showing what happens when the formula for the perfect hero is just slightly off, with various incarnations being introduced across Earth 29 and beyond. And last but certainly not least, our final alternate version of Superman is also the most recent. And that is Absolute Superman, created by Jason Aaron and Rafa Sandoval and introduced in Absolute Superman 1 in November of 2024. This Superman is a wild new version of Superman from the Absolute universe, a Darkseid created Earth Alpha where heroes are underdogs, which itself was revealed in the All-In special that dropped in October of 2024. Anyway, unlike the classic Kal-El, this Superman arrives on Earth as a young adult, not a baby. And while he does initially land in Smallville and is briefly taken in by the Kents, his stay is quickly ended by the tyrannical Lazarus Corporation, which also means this version of Kal-El does not use the Clark Kent identity. Instead, he is seen as a wandering working-class hero while he fights against the Lazarus Corp. As such, this rougher version of Kal has longer hair and a raw, dangerous edge that makes him somewhat unpredictable. His suit is also very different and is more of an armor-like sentient bodysuit that was invented by his mother and features a variety of Kryptonian tech. Altogether, Absolute Superman is one of the coolest alternate versions of Kal-El ever created, and despite his darker origins, he's still a beacon of hope to the innocent. So if you're not reading that ongoing series, we highly recommend it. But in the end, the alternate versions of Superman are more than just fun what-if stories. They're a lens that allows writers and then us as readers to examine Superman as a character. From classic Superman to the tragic Overman, from the samurai Takahito to the communist Red Sun, each version highlights different aspects of Superman's identity. Whether it's his unwavering moral compass, his alien heritage, or his role as a symbol of hope, each version of the Man of Steel reminds us why Superman remains one of the greatest superheroes of all time. And to further that point, Superman's influence has gone far beyond the pages of DC Comics, spawning a ton of characters seeking to copy the success of the last son of Krypton. So now let's kick it back over to Eris for a rundown of the most well-known Superman copycats.
It is no secret that the Man of Steel is the one who kicked off the golden age of superheroes, becoming the archetype for powerful superheroes as we know them today. As a result, Superman has inspired a crap ton of heroes throughout all of fiction that are just full-on copycats of Superman, or at the very least extremely Superman-like. And today we're going to run through several of them, but not all, because that would literally take all day. But let's start with the character that was arguably the first successful Superman copycat, and that of course would be Captain Marvel, now known as Shazam. Shazam first appeared in Wiz Comics issue 2 just 2 years after Superman's debut. Shazam is easily one of the most successful Superman copycats ever created. After Superman became the first extremely popular superhero of such magnitude, Fawcett wanted to cash in on Superman's success. Pretty much being like, well, if Superman is such a huge success, we need our version of that. A character with super strength, speed, a cape, an alter ego, and fights for justice. To put it more plainly, the circulation director at Fawcett Comics at the time, Roscoe Kent, was quoted telling his staff, quote, "Give me a Superman, only have his other identity be a 10 or 12-year-old boy rather than a man," end quote. But here's the crazy part, their Superman copycat worked better than they could have ever hoped. Since their Superman, aka Captain Marvel, was a kid that when he said the magic word Shazam grew to an adult with all the powers of Superman, it resonated more with the kids. They could now see themselves having these powers since Billy Batson was the hero of these stories, having been granted all these powers by the wizard Shazam. In fact, for a good part of the golden age of comics, Captain Marvel became the most popular superhero of the medium, even outselling Superman and Batman. So not only was Captain Marvel and or Shazam one of the first Superman copycats, there was a time where he was more successful than Superman, which is crazy. But DC would eventually get the last laugh when they purchased Shazam and brought him into the DC universe. Next up, we have Hyperion. Hyperion has all the powers a Superman copycat would have. Insane super strength, speed, reflexes, invulnerability, flight, his version of heat vision called atomic vision, enhanced senses, and the list goes on. He also wears a cape because most Superman copycats do. But besides even all that, the real thing that sends him over the top is how similar his origin is to Superman. You see, Hyperion's origin is as follows. He's from a different planet, and as a kid he was rocketed to Earth 616 right before his planet blew up. And on top of that, he draws his power from solar energy. If any of that sounds familiar, that's because it's Superman. He's the most blatant Marvel Superman copy, certainly not the only, but the most obvious. Okay, getting back to our Superman copycats, one of the most popular characters in fiction was blatantly inspired by the Man of Steel, and people rarely talk about it. And I would be referring to Goku. Everyone always likes to debate which character would win, but people rarely talk about how Goku is an obvious Superman copy. He has the trifecta of Superman elements, if you will. 1, Goku's origin is essentially Superman's origin to a T, with small changes here and there, but overall the gist is the same. Goku was from an alien race called the Saiyans, but right before his home world of Vegeta blew up, he was rocketed to Earth by his father, where he would then be raised by a kind human who found him. It's Superman's origin to a T. Second, they both grew up wanting to protect Earth and are Boy Scouts, becoming the greatest superhero their Earth has ever seen. Their overall approach to saving lives and protecting the innocent is very similar, which of course is on purpose as Goku is clearly modeled after Superman. And lastly, both are considered to be two of the most powerful characters in all of fiction. So much so, one of the most popular fictional debates in nerddom has become who would win in a fight, Superman or Goku. A battle we gave our 2 cents on right here on the channel. With that said, I know the die-hard manga and anime fans are gonna say, nope, wrong, Goku was inspired by the Monkey King, and you'd be correct, but guess what? Goku was also clearly inspired by Superman. I know it may sound crazy, but a character can be inspired by more than one character. Sticking to the manga anime world, since we're already here, we have All Might. Now, though he can't fly and doesn't have an origin similar to Superman, he is 100% a Superman type character, and thus is the Superman Superman, if you will, of his universe. He is the personification of what a hero can and should be. As All Might even said himself, "I am All Might, the world's symbol of peace and justice." All Might is basically the Tony Robbins of superheroes. He just oozes positivity and motivation in everyone around him. I think he has some of the best hero lines in fiction, such as, "If you feel yourself hitting up against your limit, remember for what cause you clench your fists," which is one of the most badass ways of saying never give up the fight. Or how about, "When there's nothing to be gained, rising to the challenge at those times is surely the mark of a true hero." An epic way to say, being selfless is what being a hero is all about. And the last one, because I just really love these quotes, "Meddling when you don't need to is the essence of being a hero." Another banger line that basically means we don't help strangers because we have to, we help because that's what it means to be a hero. It's just so good. Basically, All Might is a Superman copy in the sense that he has incredible power and is the premier superhero of his universe like Superman, but it's more than that. It's what All Might stands for. He's a symbol of peace and justice, which is something Superman made famous. Superman has become known as a symbol of hope and justice, and that's exactly what All Might is. So no matter how you want to spin it, All Might is clearly a Superman copy in a lot of ways. Moving along, we have Icon, who was the Milestone Universe's answer to Superman, but once again, I'm not just talking about in the powers and abilities area. The basic premise of his origin was clearly meant to mirror Supes in a lot of ways, just like I was saying about Goku. You see, Icon was an alien who crash-landed on Earth in a cotton field during the US slavery era. He disguised himself as a black baby where he was found by a kind old lady. What it all comes down to is Icon's origin is basically Superman's, but modified to where this alien would disguise himself as a black man so comic writer Dwayne McDuffie could use the character to touch on real-world issues like slavery and being a black man in the modern era. Icon has become one of my favorite Superman-like characters because it puts a great spin on the Superman archetype. Essentially, Icon tackled the topic of what it may have been like for a Superman-like character to be black. Though Icon is not technically a black man, that's how the world would see and treat him. Now, the crazy thing is, this is yet another Superman copycat that would be absorbed and owned by DC Comics later on. Much like DC did with Shazam, they acquired Icon and brought him into the DC universe. Though they haven't done a whole ton with him yet, he was important enough to make a few appearances in Young Justice. Icon is a great character, one I wish we saw more of, but he's clearly a Superman copy from his origin to his power set. Next, we have a Superman copycat of my own creation, and that would be Infinite from my comic Astonishing Times on Dark Horse and Comixology Originals. When the first volume of Astonishing Times was released 2 years ago, we did an episode right here on the channel where we broke down who Infinite is and what inspired his creation, and in that episode, myself and fellow co-creators say he's clearly our Superman-like character. You see, when creating a new superhero universe, you have to hit all the archetypes of characters like your super powerful leader hero, the vigilante, the telepath, speedster, magic user, and so on and so forth to make your universe diverse. And it's fun to reinvent tropes and character types that have been done so many times before within the genre. So knowing we wanted to make a love letter to the superhero genre while simultaneously creating our own world of heroes, we knew inevitably we would have to have our own Superman, or at least a character that would organically be compared to Superman or a character of that type. Enter Infinite. He is infinitely strong. There is no limit to his power as he draws his power from all life in the universe, thus making his power infinite, hence his name. He's basically a living spirit bomb, so clearly he's incredibly strong. As for his origin, we haven't really revealed it yet. That's something we plan to do in the future, but I can say it's a familiar yet new take on a character of this type. So Infinite, like Superman, is that powerful hero that's the core of our universe like Supes is for DC. If you've read Volume 1 of Astonishing Times, you know Infinite is the premier hero in the AT universe. In the present day, he lost his way, kind of went greater good thinking, wanting to sacrifice a few for saving the many. Needless to say, he's not nearly the Boy Scout Superman is, or at least not anymore. But the next Superman copycat we have is Sentry. The funny thing about Sentry is that he's a very surface level copy of Superman. In fact, his origin is more of a Captain America copy, as much like Steve Rogers, Robert Reynolds, aka Sentry, was given powers through a super soldier formula. But since Sentry is an insane powerhouse who wears a cape and has an S on his symbol, people often say he's a Superman ripoff. I mean, don't get me wrong, he's clearly in the vein of Superman. He's meant to be that type of powerhouse character, but he's also a super different character. First and foremost, he's in constant battle with the Void. The Void is basically a dark evil entity that bonded with Sentry, and because of this, Sentry is in constant battle with it as it feeds off of and amplifies all of Sentry's negative aspects. However, because of being bonded to the Void, Sentry's powers are taken to a whole different level, even being immortal. And that's on top of Sentry having the power of 1,000,000 exploding suns. Sentry is actually a very complex and tragic character. He's both one of the world's greatest heroes and biggest threats. so he's certainly a different spin on the Superman archetype. Moving along, we have Blue Marvel. Blue Marvel, like every superhero mentioned today, follows that powerhouse superhero blueprint Superman made the standard. Hence the phrase Superman-like character, and why Superman is always the gold standard when it comes to powerful heroes. So Blue Marvel is certainly a Superman copy in that sense. But Blue Marvel, aka Adam Brashear, isn't an alien from another world. He was a scientist and Marine who got into an antimatter accident that gave him his incredible powers. He has all the powers of Superman, like incredible strength, flight, invulnerability, healing factors, super reflexes, senses, stamina, agility, all of that good stuff on top of antimatter abilities. This gives Blue Marvel insane talent. Dude also has molecular manipulation. He could straight up control things on a molecular level, meaning he could strip a person down to nothing. He's also kind of a broken character like everyone else on this list. However, if you want to know just how powerful he is, we did an episode all about that, which you could find right here. Now, another obvious Superman copycat would be Martian Manhunter. He has a ton of the same abilities as Superman and is also an alien, or I guess more specifically, a Martian. But he also has a ton of different abilities from Superman, most notably his telepathy, telekinesis, intangibility, and shape-shifting. He's actually another one of my favorite Superman copies. In fact, he's one of my favorite superheroes ever. But he definitely had to be mentioned because when you think of Superman-like characters, he's one of the first that come to mind. Not only does he have a very similar power set, his personality of always wanting to do good and help others is much in line with Clark. Now, I know what some of you are thinking, how the hell have you not mentioned Homelander yet? Homelander is clearly meant to be an evil version of Superman, though he is not clearly as powerful as Superman. He is the most powerful hero in his universe, being the leader of the Seven, which is the Boys Universe's version of the Justice League. He's even presented to be the Boy Scout hero to the public, but behind the scenes, he is insanely evil. Like Martian Manhunter and some of the others on this list, this one is very obvious, so I'm not going to spend too much time on him, although I will say Homelander is an awesome take on the Superman type, as again, it's an evil version of that archetype, and that's just always a ton of fun to explore. It's kind of similar to Injustice Superman. And if you've watched the Boys TV series, Homelander, played by Anthony Starr, is phenomenal and terrifying. One of the best superhero performances I've seen for any Superman type character. Another obvious one that I know everyone's waiting for me to mention is Omni-Man. Yet another take on the Superman archetype. Omni-Man is part of an alien race known as the Viltrumites and was sent to Earth to conquer it. And I'm sure if you haven't read the comic series, which you should, you've at least watched the incredible Invincible animated TV series that sticks pretty close to the books. And in that series, we already started to see Omni-Man's turn from once being evil, wanting to conquer Earth for his race, to slowly realizing maybe that's not the right thing to do, as his son is half human. So he has a completely different arc, reinventing the Superman type character, but the similarities are undeniable. I mean, he's also from an alien race who was sent to Earth, and then his home planet was later destroyed because himself, Mark, and Thaddeus destroyed it, but nonetheless, just a new great twist on a familiar story. Here's another Superman copycat that I bet most people don't talk about, and that is Mighty Mouse. Mighty Mouse was first created in 1942 and was literally just meant to be Superman in mouse form. This was one of my favorite cartoons as a kid. I watched the reruns all the time. Mighty Mouse was created by animator Isadore Klein, who worked at Terry Toon's studio, and one day he was like, you know what we should do? Make a parody or homage to Superman, so they made Mighty Mouse. He debuted in the 1942 episode titled Mouse of Tomorrow to play off Superman being called the Man of Tomorrow. Mighty Mouse is a classic and a parody of Superman as admitted by his own creator, and a ton of fun. Now, another popular Superman-like character is Gladiator from Marvel Comics. We just recently saw him in the X-Men 97 series, and just from his appearance in the series, you could automatically tell, oh, so you're supposed to be like Superman, got it. The way he moves, his power set, and of course, the iconic cape that all characters of this type seem to have. He's the leader of the Imperial Guards for the Shi'ar Empire. His real name is Kal-El, and he was also from an alien race known as the Strontians. Because of this, he has super strength, speed, stamina, invulnerability, agility, reflexes, flight, heat vision, microscopic vision, freeze breath, and more. Yeah, those powers are literally just copy-paste Superman. I mean, come on, heat vision? You couldn't at least call it laser vision or something? When it all comes down to it, Superman is probably the character that is copied the most, as he's thought of as the traditional superhero because he's the one that started it all. I mean, we can literally go on and on with Superman copycats. It would be extremely easy to make a part 2 of this episode, but instead we'll just do some honorable mentions, like Brandon from Brightburn, which was essentially James Gunn being like, hey, what if when Superman landed on Earth and he grew up, he was evil instead of a savior? And it was a great exploration of what could happen if a powerful being from another world came to our planet and instead of helping us, wanted to do the opposite. Also, it's kind of ironic that now he's actually making a Superman movie, so he went full circle on that one. Then of course we have Icarus, certainly MCU Icarus. You cannot tell me they weren't trying to make their version of Henry Cavill's Superman for the MCU. The way he moved, fought, and everything was verbatim Henry Cavill, Zack Snyder Superman. It was shameless. If you just want to do superheroes created just for film and not adapted to film like Icarus, we could even do that all day long. From Metro Man to Megamind to Hancock played by Will Smith, and I know we can't forget to mention Meteor Man. Meteor Man was one of my favorite superhero films as a kid. I rented that thing so many times, my parents should have just bought it for me. But back to comics, there's more Superman copycats like Apollo, Supreme, Superior, and Marvel Man. The list just goes on and on. But while that list of Superman copycats shows his broad influence on mainstream superhero storytelling, let's move on to an overview of how Superman himself expanded his reach over the years from comics into TV, animation, live-action movies, and even video games. We'll start with Superman's first step off the page with the 1940 Adventures of Superman radio series starring Bud Collyer, which kicked off just 2 years after his debut in Action Comics 1 in 1938. It's the first adaptation of Superman outside of comics and is arguably the most important thing to happen to Superman beyond the page, as it cemented a ton of his core elements and catchphrases. The show ran for over 2,000 episodes, giving us iconic lines like faster than a speeding bullet, more powerful than a locomotive, able to leap tall buildings in a single bound. That one in particular is one of the most famous phrases in all of fiction, and it came straight from the Superman radio series. Another banger that's just as legendary: look, up in the sky, it's a bird, it's a plane, it's Superman. A lot of folks might think this line came from the comics, but nope, they were born in the Adventures of Superman radio series. Since then, these phrases have become synonymous with the character across all media. This radio show also gave us Superman's weakness, Kryptonite, which debuted in 1943. The reasons for its creation is because the voice of Superman, Bud Collyer, had to take some time off, and this was a reason for him to take time off, as Superman was weakened by Kryptonite, so he didn't appear in a few episodes. Plus, it introduced Jimmy Olsen. Before the radio series, Jimmy was just an unnamed character in the comics, but the show gave him a name and made him a key figure in Superman's world. Jimmy's popularity from the radio show led to his rise in the comics, becoming a pivotal piece of Superman's mythos and eventually landing his own solo book, Superman's Pal, Jimmy Olsen. The radio series is a cornerstone of Superman's history and ran from 1940 to 1951. Now, let's jump to live-action TV, where Superman really started to shine. The first live-action TV series was Adventures of Superman, running from 1952 to 1958, starring George Reeves as Clark Kent and Superman. The show started with a noir, serious, grounded vibe full of dramatic tension and crime plots. But as the seasons rolled on, it leaned into lighter, family-friendly sci-fi elements with mad scientists, aliens, and goofy villains. Adventures of Superman is credited as the first successful superhero TV show, beamed into millions of homes across America, cementing Superman as a TV icon. George Reeves' portrayal of Superman influenced nearly every actor who's played the character since, setting the tone for what Superman is and should be. The next live-action Superman series was Superboy, running from 1988 to 1992, starring John James Newton in the first season and later Gerard Christopher as Superboy. The show followed Clark during his college years at Shuster University in Florida, a nice nod to Joe Shuster, Superman's co-creator. Superboy was campy, pure 80s and 90s cheese in its first season, but it tried to get more serious in seasons 2 through 4, shifting to a more serialized storytelling format. The series gave us live-action versions of Bizarro, Metallo, Mixia Spitlick, and a ton more. Yeah, it's cheesy and doesn't always hold up, but if you grew up with it, you probably have a soft spot for it. Next, we've got Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman, running from 1993 to 1997, starring Dean Cain as the Man of Steel. I absolutely love this series. Me and my mom would watch it every single week. It was more of a soap opera meets Superman, focusing way more on Clark's human side than his superhero antics. As the title suggests, the heart of the show was the romantic tension between Lois and Clark/Superman. It had its typical 90s cheese, but man, I loved it and still do for nostalgia's sake. For a lot of 90s kids like me, Dean Cain was our live-action Superman, but I know for many of you, the Superman you grew up with is Tom Welling from Smallville. Smallville aired from 2001 to 2011 and took a totally different approach. Clark was never called Superman and didn't wear the iconic costume until the series finale. The show focused on Clark as a teenager following his journey into early adulthood in Smallville. So instead of Lois Lane in the early seasons, Clark was head over heels for Lana Lang. Michael Rosenbaum played Lex Luthor, who, fun fact, also voiced voiced Wally West Flash in the Justice League and Justice League Unlimited animated series. Ultimately, I don't need to explain Smallville. Most of us grew up with it and love it. It's amazing and paved the way for the Arrowverse. Speaking of recent shows, we've got Superman and Lois, which ran for 4 seasons, wrapping up in December of 2024. It's a fantastic series that captures the essence of Superman and his mythos, balancing Clark's family life with his role as the Man of Steel. It's still fresh in our minds, so I won't dive too deep, but if you haven't watched it, go check it out. Now let's shift to animated TV series, where DC absolutely kills it. First up, we have the 1941 to 1942 Fleischer Superman cartoons, released in Technicolor by Paramount under Fleischer Studios. This was Superman's first animated appearance, and to this day, the animation is phenomenal, timeless, classic, and nostalgic. It's so good that it inspired the animation style for Batman the Animated Series in 1992. The series consisted of 17 episodes, each 7 to 10 minutes long. It's one of my favorite takes on the character ever, iconic and still incredible. You can watch all 17 episodes on archive.org. But moving on from Fleischer's Superman, we've got the New Adventures of Superman animated series by Filmation, running from 1966 to 1970. Filmation is an iconic studio behind classics like Archie Comics, Fat Albert, Star Trek the Animated Series, He-Man, and a bunch of DC-based series. This one ran for 3 seasons, totaling 68 episodes. Each episode had a 6-minute Superman story, a segment featuring another DC hero or character, and a third segment with Superman teaming up with someone else. The series brought us all the classic Superman villains we love, like Luthor, Brainiac, Prankster, Toyman, Mixia, Spitlick, and more. It also pushed Superman's truth, justice, and the American way mantra outside of comics. Next, we've got Super Friends, running from 1973 to 1986. This is one of the most iconic superhero cartoons ever, featuring not just Superman, but Batman, Robin, Wonder Woman, Aquaman, and tons more. It's essentially the first Justice League animated series, complete with the Hall of Justice. The show introduced new characters like Wendy, Marvin, and Wonder Dog in the first season, who were later replaced by the Wonder Twins and their space monkey Gleek. Super Friends is a fantastic beloved series and one of the most iconic superhero cartoons of all time. From there, we've got Superman the Animated Series that ran from 1996 to 2000, my personal favorite Superman cartoon. It was built on the success of Batman the Animated Series and remains one of the best interpretations of the Man of Steel. From the way it portrayed Superman to how it handled his villains, this series made characters like Lobo, Livewire, and Parasite iconic for the modern era. Superman the Animated Series is my favorite Superman thing outside of comics, but a super close second, maybe even tied, is Superman in Justice League and Justice League Unlimited. The show ran from 2001 to 2006. The finale gave us the iconic fight between Superman and Darkseid, where Superman tells Darkseid he feels like he lives in a world made of cardboard, always holding back to avoid hurting anyone. Not only is Superman great in this series, but so are all the DC heroes, giving us definitive versions of so many characters. Justice League Unlimited is arguably the best superhero animated series ever created, as it does not just one, but so many characters justice. No pun intended. Then we've got Krypto the Superdog from 2005, a fun, cute animated series that Superman appeared in. A lot of you probably grew up with it, so it's worth a mention. Next up is Young Justice from 2010 to 2022, one of the best things DC has ever done, right up there with Justice League and Justice League Unlimited. It's got episodic storytelling, amazing character arcs, and fantastic animation. Even though it was crazy popular, it got canceled after 2 seasons. But the fans were so loud that it came back for a 3rd season in 2019 and a 4th in 2021. While Superman's in a good chunk of the show, it mainly focuses on Justice League sidekicks, kind of like a Teen Titans vibe. Finally, we've got the most recent Superman animated series on Max, or I guess now HBO Max once again, My Adventures with Superman, voiced by Jack Quaid. I just finished watching the first 2 seasons with my daughters, and they're obsessed. It's a ton of fun with an anime-inspired vibe that totally works. The series takes some liberties with Superman's mythos, giving us a fresh take, but it fits the show perfectly. Now let's talk direct-to-video animated films. There's a ton, so I'll run through them quick. We've got Superman Brainiac Attack, set in the Superman the Animated Series universe, a classic. Superman Doomsday, which gives us an animated version of the death of Superman. There's also Justice League The New Frontier, adapting Darwin Cook's iconic comic, but one of my favorites is Superman Batman Public Enemies. I've got fond memories of watching it when I was still living with my parents. Then we've got Justice League Crisis on 2 Earths, Superman Batman Apocalypse, and Superman Shazam, The Return of Black Adam. That one is underrated. It's like under an hour, so check it out. All-Star Superman is a phenomenal adaptation adaptation of the graphic novel, so watch the movie, read the book. Then there's another fan favorite, which is Justice League Doom, adapting the story where Batman's contingency plans to take down the Justice League are exposed. Superman versus the Elite is super iconic, especially for that ending where Superman goes all out against the Elite. Trust me, it's wild. Without spoiling, there's a great twist. We've also got Justice League War, adapting the New 52 Justice League, Justice League Throne of Atlantis, Justice League God and Monsters from the Batman the Animated Series creator Bruce Timm. Then there's the death of Superman and the reign of the Supermen, which pair with Superman Doomsday to cover Superman's death and return. And we have one of my all-time favorites, Justice League Dark Apocalypse War. It's like the Avengers Endgame of the DC animated films, wrapping up the DC animated movie universe. Constantine does steal the show, but Superman is pretty awesome too. Now, let's move on to live action films, which we're all super familiar with, so I'll keep it brief. The first Superman film was a 1954 short called Stamp Day for Superman, starring George Reeves. Then we've got the most iconic Superman movie ever, 1978's Superman the Movie, starring Christopher Reeve. It spawned 3 sequels, Superman 2, Superman 3, and Superman 4, The Quest for Peace. None match the first, but they're nostalgic and fun. Superman 4 dropped in 1987, and Superman didn't hit the big screen again until 2006's Superman Returns, starring Brandon Routh, meant as a loose sequel to the Reeve films. It got mixed reviews, but gave us that iconic scene where that bullet flattens against Superman's eyeball. Pretty great. Then 2013 kicked off the modern era with Man of Steel, starring Henry Cavill. He returned in 2016's Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice and 2017's Justice League, plus the 2021 Snyder Cut. And obviously the most current rendition of Superman live action for the big screen is James Gunn's Superman, starring David Corenswet as the Man of Steel. And it's absolutely phenomenal. If you haven't seen it, go see it. Let's wrap this section with Superman in video games, starting with the 1978 Superman Atari game. It wasn't great, but at the time, it was mind-blowing to see Superman in a game, even though he was just like little colored boxes. Next, we got Superman the Game in 1985 for Commodore 64 and Atari 8-bit, before my time, but still part of his history. Then came the 1987 NES Superman game with a Japanese version rocking John Williams' iconic Superman theme. In 1988, we got Superman the arcade game, also featuring Williams' score, because that's like the definitive score for Superman still to this day. There were a few more Superman games from Commodore 64 and other systems, but things really popped off for us 90s kids with 1992's Superman for Sega Genesis. You controlled Superman battling through levels to take down villains and face Brainiac. I remember seeing this at Toys R Us and KB Toys all the time. Then 1994 would give us the death and return of Superman for Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis, which was based on the iconic comic storyline. If you were a comic fan, you had to have it. 1999 gave us one of the worst games ever, Superman The New Adventures for Nintendo 64. I'm gonna tell you something, I had this game, my parents got it for me for like $5 on clearance at Target. I was stoked at first because it was based on Superman the Animated Series, but it was unplayable. You just flew around like going through these endless stupid rings for no reason. Horrendous. It's still considered by most to be one of the worst video games of all time. Not like worst Superman game, just one of the worst video games ever. But Superman got some redemption in 2003 with Superman Countdown to Apocalypse for Game Boy Advance, another game tied to the animated series. Then 2006 brought Superman Returns, based on the movie, for Nintendo DS, PlayStation 2, Xbox 360, and Xbox. There's been a few more Superman games since, but none have hit the heights of, say, Batman's Arkham series or Spider-Man's PS4 game. It's a damn shame because a Superman game could be incredible. Fans have made Unreal Engine mock-ups that look insane. There's just so much untapped potential and money to be made. I don't know why it hasn't happened yet with today's tech. Anyway, at this point, we've covered everything from Superman's origins and powers to his greatest enemies, story arcs, and alternate versions. So it's time to put it all together and break down some of Kal-El's greatest battles across his 87 years, starting with the comics. Because of his OP status, Superman has had some serious battles over his nearly 80 years in comic books, but we managed to narrow down the 10 that we think gave Supes the greatest challenge, and in many cases, the biggest beating. Leading off at number 10 is the iconic brawl between Superman and Batman at the end of Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns miniseries. When the government orders Superman to bring Batman in, Bruce refuses to go quietly and stages an assault on Supes wearing a suit of armor specially designed to fight the Man of Steel. The two exchange massive blows that leave each of them bloody, but ultimately Batman was too prepared and manages to outmaneuver Superman by weakening him with synthetic kryptonite. In the end, we're left with one of the most shocking and legendary takedowns in all of comic book history. Coming in at number 9 is Superman vs. Thor in 2003's Avenger JLA crossover. During a conflict between the two teams, where both are attempting to secure the Cosmic Cube, Superman finds himself toe-to-toe with the God of Thunder himself. These two trade massive punches. Then Superman hits Thor with his heat vision. Thor then tries to counter by hitting Superman with Mjolnir, but when he does, Supes literally stops it with his bare hand and knocks Thor out cold. Freaking awesome. Next up, at number 8, is Superman's collision with Captain Atom in Injustice: Gods Among Us, issue 32. Many of Superman's most vicious fights come against characters who have similar strengths and abilities to his own, and Captain Atom is one of those beings. Well, in the issue of Injustice, Superman and Captain Atom come to blows near the Fortress of Solitude. They exchange earth-moving punches until Captain Atom got the upper hand and knocked Superman to his knees. But just before Atom could deliver a potentially fatal shot, Wonder Woman pierced his suit with her sword, breaching containment of Atom's built-in radiation. So he grabs a bloody Superman and flies him into space instead, where Captain Atom then exploded with the force of 10 nuclear bombs. But despite the incredible power of the blast, Superman managed to survive another close call. Landing at number 7 is the Man of Steel vs. Wonder Woman in Superman Sacrifice. We've talked quite a bit about how well Wonder Woman's power set matches up against Superman, and in this story, she was put to the test. Basically, Max Lord took control of Superman's mind, causing him to see horrible delusions of major villains killing his wife, Lois Lane, and others. This led to Superman nearly killing Batman and attacking other members of the team, which leaves Wonder Woman no choice but to take on the Big Blue and try to stop him. The ensuing fight rages for several bloody, violent pages and includes Superman literally punching Wonder Woman from the sun back to Earth. Wonder Woman eventually uses her tiara to cut Superman's neck and distract him long enough to break Max Lord's hold on his mind and return him back to sanity. But not before this fight made its mark as one of the most brutal Superman fights of all time. At number 6 is Superman vs. Wraith in Superman Unchained issue 8. This epic and insanely brutal fight lasted over 15 pages, with Superman putting a beating on Wraith, from Gotham City all the way to the Gobi Desert, but Wraith just keeps on coming, finally forcing Supes to acknowledge that Wraith is more superior in power when he has access to all of his abilities. Wraith then grabs Superman by his cape and spins him like a top, before throwing him across the desert and into a mountain. Superman then rebounds and flies him into space in an attempt to deprive him of oxygen long enough to knock him out, punching the crap out of Wraith along the way. But the Beast drives the Man of Steel back to Earth and into the ocean, where he attempts to drown Superman and deliver a death blow. But Superman manages to dig through the ocean floor and lure Wraith all the way down to the Earth's core, where his energy manipulation powers no longer work due to the intense magnetic force. And once it's a level playing field, Superman goes to work on Wraith. He beats him senseless and leaves him lying unconscious in a pool of molten lava. If that's not savage, I don't know what is. Number 5 on the list is the best of several serious beatdowns that occurred in 2005's Infinite Crisis event. That would be Earth 1 Superman and Earth 2 Superman taking on a raging Superboy Prime in Infinite Crisis issue 7. With heroes dropping left and right during the climax of the Infinite Crisis event, Superboy Prime is seemingly unstoppable until the Earth 1 and Earth 2 Supermen team up to fly Prime straight through the heart of a red sun, which destroyed his armor and reduced some of his powers. But unfortunately, it's not enough, because after they crash land on the surface of Oa, Superboy Prime then goes ballistic and literally beats the older Earth 2 Superman to death with his bare hands. Earth 1 Supes does finally intervene, and after another bloody fist fight, manages to stop Prime, but not in time to save Golden Age Superman. At number 4, we have Superman vs. Shazam, in issue 4 of Mark Waid's classic story, Kingdom Come. This is another case where Superman and his opponent share many similarities, but Shazam's powers are derived from magic, which happens to be a vulnerability for the Man of Steel. So when a brainwashed Shazam unleashes on Superman, things get intense pretty quick. The two powerhouse heroes trade epic punches and blasts of heat vision and energy, until an angry Superman says enough. He then grabs Shazam by the jaw and starts to squeeze so forcefully that it focuses Shazam's mind and allows him to break through Lex Luthor's mind control. It's just an epic scene all the way around. Crashing in at number 3 is Superman vs. Mongul in For the Man Who Has Everything. In this story, Mongul attacks Superman with a telepathic alien plant called the Black Mercy that attaches to a host and feeds off of its bio-aura. Don't ask me what that means. Anyway, it attached itself to Superman and put him in a trance-like state, where he was awake, but only seeing what the organism wanted him to see. However, once Batman found a way to remove the plant and snap Superman out of it, a very pissed off Superman tears into Mongul, initiating an intense fight that lasted nearly 9 pages. They punched each other through walls, Supes hits Mongul in the chest with a heat vision blast, Mongul even stomped on Superman so hard that the floor around them collapsed. Mongul then manages to get the upper hand after Superman gets distracted, but before he could land a finishing blow, good old Robin shows up and attaches the Black Mercy plant to Mongul, putting him in the same trance-like state and ending his assault. Runner-up on our list is Superman vs. Darkseid in Superman Batman issue 13. After seemingly killing Supergirl, an enraged Superman exchanges world-altering attacks with the Dark Lord. The fight starts on Earth, but continues all the way to the sun's orbit, with Darkseid taunting the Man of Steel with Kara's death the whole way. But being so close to the radiation from the yellow sun boosts Superman's powers so much that it knocks Darkseid out with a flurry of massive punches and then flies his unconscious body at incredible speed all the way to the edge of the universe, where he then traps Darkseid in the source wall and leaves him there. Come on, people, that's just ridiculous. And in our opinion, there's only one fight that beats it. Taking the top spot at number 1 is of course the iconic Superman vs. Doomsday in the Death of Superman story. I don't think this one needs much explanation, but in short, Superman confronts a crazed and destructive Doomsday, which leads to one of the most brutal and epic battles in comic book history. The fight continues over great distances, leaving a trail of craters and buildings reduced to rubble in the wake. And at one point, the two are hitting each other so hard that the shockwaves start to create freaking earthquakes. In the end, Superman manages to kill Doomsday, stopping his reign of terror, but only by sacrificing his own life to protect Metropolis in the process. It doesn't get more brutal than that.
Okay, so that covers our picks for Superman's best comic battles, and now you're asking, what about his fights in movies, TV, and animation? Well, we've got those too. First up, we gotta talk about the Superman vs. Zod fight in 2013's Man of Steel. This is hands down the most epic and destructive live-action Superman fight we've gotten to date. And like I said, we've already seen the James Gunn Superman movie, which has some great fight sequences in it, but this one still reigns supreme. This Man of Steel showdown is absolutely insane. Yes, there is a ton of collateral damage, but the fight itself is amazing. We get two Kryptonians going all out in Metropolis, smashing through buildings, throwing supersonic punches, blasting heat vision, and duking it out in a way that feels massive. For instance, that Zack Snyder Superman punch with the camera zooming in and out is an iconic shot now. And the fight ends with Superman being forced to kill Zod by snapping his neck, a moment that's super controversial but undeniably iconic. We've been pretty vocal about the fact that we haven't always been the biggest fan of Zack Snyder's story choices in the DCEU, but visuals and fight choreography have never been his problem, and this is a perfect example. Next up is the Superman vs. Darkseid brawl in the Justice League Unlimited series finale, titled Destroyer. In this one, Superman goes one-on-one with Darkseid, and this time he's not holding back. In fact, during the fight, he tells Darkseid, "I feel like I live in a world made of cardboard, always taking constant care not to break something, to break someone, never allowing myself to lose control, even for a moment, or someone could die. But you can take it, can't you, big man? What we have here is a rare opportunity for me to cut loose and show you just how powerful I really am." He then follows this by punching Darkseid so hard it causes a sonic boom that sends him flying. Not only is this some of the best dialogue for Superman outside of comics, but it's also one of his greatest fights ever. Superman's literally telling Darkseid during the fight, "I'm always holding back, scared I might break something or kill someone, but you can handle it, so here's my real strength." For us, this isn't just one of Superman's best fights, this is one of his best moments, period. And staying in the animated universe, we've got the incredible 2012 Superman vs. the Elite fight from the animated movie. This one is wild because Superman takes a darker approach to teach the Elite a lesson about morality. Basically, he pretends to buy into their Superman needs to kill to be effective argument and starts systematically killing off members of the Elite in front of their leader, Manchester Black. This completely freaks out Manchester, and he basically responds with, "You're not supposed to do this, Superman doesn't kill." Superman then fires back, "But this is what you wanted. You said killing was the only way to truly stop crime and be effective." Now, the plot twist, of course, is that it's all a ruse. Superman didn't actually kill them, he just made it look like he did to prove his moral code matters in a world full of violence. Which again, overall makes this fight really stand out. But shifting back to live action, we've got the awesome Superman versus the Justice League fight in the 2021 Snyder Cut of the Justice League. Yes, it was in the original, but we're going with the Snyder Cut. Anyway, this scene shows just how powerful Superman is as he effortlessly takes on and beats Batman, Wonder Woman, Aquaman, the Flash, Flash and Cyborg all at the same time. I mean, just the moment where Flash tries to speed blitz Superman, but Superman tracks him with his eyes and nearly hits him is one of the best moments in any superhero film, especially when Flash realizes that Superman can see him. Again, Zack Snyder's visuals are just amazing in moments like this. Next up, we've got the Superman versus Lobo fight in the Superman the Animated Series episode, The Main Man. This fight between these two powerhouses is just a blast, showing how threatening Lobo can be while keeping it fun and punk rock. Lobo is of course just a beast, but Superman holds his own in a fight that's equal parts intense and entertaining. But the last non-comic fight we'll mention is the iconic junkyard fight between Clark Kent and evil Superman in Superman 3. The movie itself is just okay, but this scene is one of the best moments in the entire franchise because of its psychological depth. If you haven't seen Superman 3, here's the gist. Superman gets exposed to synthetic kryptonite, which doesn't weaken him, but corrupts his personality, turning him into a dark, greedy, selfish version of himself. He's a drunk, destructive jerk who neglects his superhero duties completely. And at one point, his good side, Clark Kent, splits from the evil Superman, leading to a physical fight in a junkyard between the two that symbolizes his inner struggle of good versus evil. Clark's good persona battles the corrupted Superman, and while the fighting and choreography are a bit dated by today's standards, it's what the fight means that makes it iconic. It's Superman fighting his inner demons to reclaim his role as the symbol of hope we know and love. And in the end, Clark wins, reclaiming control of Superman and pulling open his shirt to reveal the bright, bolder Superman suit underneath. It's a 7-minute sequence that is memorable not for the punches, but for what's at stake and what it represents. Okay, so that wraps up our look at Superman's greatest battles throughout all media. But speaking of Superman's suit, we couldn't do an ultimate history of Superman without talking about his universally recognized suit and symbol. It's easily one of the most important aspects of Superman as a character, and it has evolved quite a bit since his first suit in Action Comics #1 in 1938. So let's dive in and see how Soup's fit has changed over the years.
Alright, so obviously it all started in Action Comics 1 back in 1938, meaning this is the basis for everything to come with Superman's suit over the next several decades. So his red cape, blue bodysuit, yellow belt, red trunks, and S-shield were all implemented in the very first outing of Supes. Even his red boots, although the funny thing about the red boots is that we only see them on the cover of Action Comics 1, not the interiors. In the interior of the issue, his boots are blue, matching his bodysuit. His boots would stay blue until Action Comics issue 6, when artist and co-creator of Superman Joe Shuster finally decided to give him red boots, as we saw on the cover of Action Comics 1. A funny thing that happened in Action Comics 7 is Superman had yellow boots, but that was due to a color error during printing. Superman's S-shield that we would learn many years later that doesn't stand for Superman but Hope would also gradually change throughout Superman's first several issues of Action Comics. You could see it was way simpler, almost looking like a gold police shield badge with an S in it. Actually, the gold police-like shield only lasted for the first issue of Action Comics, because in the second issue, it was basically an upside-down triangle. And on the first panel of Action Comics 2, Shuster forgot to put Superman's S-shield on the chest altogether, which is hilarious. By the time 1939 rolled around, Superman was given his first solo series with him front and center on the cover, giving us pretty much the suit he still wears to this day for the most part. Although the S-shield, as you could see, still didn't reach its final form, so to speak. Its final form, as we know it now, wouldn't really stick until issue 14 of Superman. We did see glimpses of this shield starting in issue 6, with it varying in design until issue 14 of Superman. So the classic Superman costume that is still used to this day, with little variations depending on the artist, first appeared in Superman 14. We're talking about the red cape with yellow shield on it, blue bodysuit, red trunks and boots, and of course his iconic S-shield the way we all know it now. By the time 1941 rolled around, we would get the timeless classic 40s Superman animated series dubbed Fleischer Superman. The series kept much of Superman's overall look, changing minor things, like making his belt red with a yellow buckle and changing the inside of Superman's crest from yellow to black, which I very much dig and would make its way into comic books years later. This is one of the most loved and iconic looks for Superman, with the series inspiring Batman the Animated Series. Okay, the next evolution of Superman's suit came with the 1950s Adventures of Superman live action series. This iconic show gave us our very first official live action Superman suit, which is as traditional of a look for Superman as you're gonna get. It's literally ripped right from the comics. Is it extremely dated and not that well done? Of course. It was the 50s, which adds to the charm and classic nature of the suit. Anyway, jumping forward in time a number of years, and we would get arguably the most iconic live action Superman, and that is Christopher Reeve's Superman. Like George Reeves' Superman, this suit was ripped right out of the comics. Is it literally just an all-cloth suit with red boots? Yes, but it's a staple in Superman's history. I mean, it's Christopher Reeve's Superman. Without him, we wouldn't have gotten Superman's definitive John Williams theme, but something that should be noted is that Reeves' Superman introduced a huge S-shield on his chest. Before this, it was portrayed way smaller. This would actually inspire the comic book Superman suit. Superman's costume would more or less stay the same until the mid-80s. But when artist and writer John Byrne took over Superman's writing and drawing duties for Volume 2 of Superman's self-titled series, we got some more changes starting in 1987. The biggest change Byrne made for Superman's suit is making Superman's S-crest massive on his chest, much like Reeves' Superman. This is the version of Superman I and many of you grew up with, and Byrne implemented this change in the late 80s, but it carried over all the way to Dan Jurgens' iconic Superman run with the big S-shield lasting pretty much all of the 90s. Superman was also sporting that massive S-shield in Superman 75, The Death of Superman. This would also lead directly into a massive change for Superman's suit. You see, when he came back to life, he wore an entirely new black and silver suit that was capeless. It's actually known as the Recovery or Solar Suit. When he was brought back to life at the Fortress of Solitude, he was placed in this suit to help him recover faster as he was just brought back to life. The suit is able to do this by absorbing sunlight at an accelerated rate. So it doesn't just look cool, it has a purpose. Anyway, Superman would return to his classic late 80s and 90s red and blue suit in issue 82 of Superman, still sporting that mullet he grew out during the reign of Superman. 'Cause you know, business in the front, party in the back. Now after this, the next major suit we would get is the Adventures of Lois and Clark's suit, and I loved this show as a kid. Anyway, this Superman was played by Dean Cain and gave us something similar to Reeves' suit, but with a much darker blue bodysuit, longer cape, and even bigger S-shield to match with what Jurgens was doing in the comics at the time. From here is arguably my favorite suit or style for Superman, as I'm a sucker for anything DCAU, and that would be Superman's suit and overall look from Superman the Animated Series, which premiered in 1996. I still remember watching the premiere for this series at night prime time before it hit its normal schedule every day after school and of course Saturday mornings. This is Superman in the amazing Bruce Timm art style, who co-created Batman the Animated Series and designed all the characters. Well, Batman the Animated Series was so successful, Bruce Timm and company did the same thing for Superman, giving us Superman the Animated Series, creating one of the best looks and overall versions of Superman. It's just a staple for 90s kids and one of the best things made for Superman outside of comics. Maybe the best. But then going back to the comics, in 1997, we got what would be dubbed Superman Blue, as Superman got a whole new look and costume. During this time in comics, Superman was newly married to Lois Lane, but something strange was happening to his powers. The Man of Steel was somehow being turned into a being of pure energy and developing new unique powers because of this. Now when I say new powers, I'm saying electrical powers. So forget being faster than a speeding bullet, he was faster than lightning. But because he was turning into a being of pure energy, he needed a new suit to contain it. So he had a doctor and professor friend make him a containment suit that just so happened to be blue, matching his new blue energy self, thus giving us Blue Suit Superman, or Superman Blue as he's referred to. Now there's also Superman Red. Superman Red is actually an alternate version of Superman. He was created when using a mind-enhancing machine that was powered by kryptonite to make him more intelligent, but instead it gave us Superman Red. Next up is another one of my favorite looks or redesigns for Superman, just modifying his classic look, and that is Justice League and Justice League Unlimited animated series, which kicked off in 2001. Again, it's in Bruce Timm's art style, and it's just a modified version of the Superman animated series look. I absolutely love it. As far as super suits goes, it's the classic red and blue Superman suit, but I had to mention it just because this version of Superman is a staple for many of us. Then we have the Lee Bermejo Superman suit. This costume, yet again, is a classic Superman look, but Bermejo's art is so specific, the texturing and art style makes it feel like a different suit. With the textures lay over Superman, the wrinkles and structure of his cape, and the raised crest symbol on his chest, all made for one of the best Superman suits ever, even though again, it's basically just his classic normal suit. Then of course we have one of the most beloved looks for Superman from one of the most beloved Superman stories of all time, and that is Frank Quietly's Superman suit from All-Star Superman. This just screams classic all over it, yet again it's just the standard Superman suit with minor changes. The way the cape draped over his shoulders, the huge Superman crest on his chest, but more distinct to this version of Superman, his trunks coming down longer on the legs, being not so much like tighty-whities but more like boxer shorts. Next we have the 2006 Superman Returns Brandon Routh Superman suit. This is probably my least favorite live-action Superman look. There's three things I don't like about the suit that they changed. First, and foremost, the fact that the red on the suit is maroon. Superman should have a bright standard red, not this very dark maroon red. And second, I don't like how high the collar is on his neck. I feel like it just looks a little weird and awkward. And lastly, they made the Superman crest or logo on his chest very tiny. I mean, overall, the movie is not considered great by any means, and unfortunately, the suit isn't either. Next up, let's go back to comic books, and in 2011, we got Superman's New 52 suit. This is when DC decided to reboot all of their continuity, and with that, giving us modernized looks for all of their characters, redesigns given to us by Jim Lee. Superman's look stayed the same while also changing drastically. He still kept the blue suit, classic Superman logo, and red red cape. But the blue bodysuit was now made to be almost like armored plating. Red piping was added around his wrist, which now came to a point over the top of his hand, and he was given a collar of sorts that went up the sides of his neck. His belt was also made red instead of yellow, and by far the biggest change was the ditching of the trunks on the outside of the suit. I really dig the suit. Still to this day, I think it's a perfect modern update for the character. With that said, of course, I'm a purist loving the OG one with the red trunks on the outside, but again, I don't mind this modern take. It makes sense. After DC's New 52, we would get DC Rebirth in 2016, which was yet another reboot of sorts for DC for Superman's classic suit, which was updated yet again. His suit reverts back to the classic bodysuit, no longer having that armored plating look. They kept the red belt from the New 52 suit, just changed it a little bit, and the red trunks were still gone, and most notably, they made his boots blue. But this brings us back to live action with CW Superman, who first appeared in CW Supergirl. His first suit for Supergirl kept all the classic elements of Superman with little changes, just like every rendition of the suit. The blue bodysuit was darker blue, and the way the cape sat on the shoulders was changed. The straps for the cape literally came out of the top of his crest, and of course, no trunks. However, once this version of Superman was given his own series, Superman and Lois, his suit was of course upgraded, being more muscular, the belt design changed, and his cape sitting more classic around the collar. I think this version is way better. My only gripe I have with this is how tight it is around the collar. Like I said earlier, I'm not a fan of like those choking collars around the neck. This brings us to Henry Cavill Superman, who has easily the best live action Superman suit. His suit more or less stayed the same since his introduction in the Man of Steel, with minor changes throughout the DCEU. This Superman suit is pretty much perfection, especially for live action. This Superman suit still has no trunks, but everything else is pretty much OG classic Superman. Just a modern rendition, giving us an awesome textured bodysuit with Kryptonian patterns. Then more currently, you have the My Adventures of Superman suit, which is a really good series. If you haven't checked it out, it's fun. This is more or less an American anime version take on Superman. But to bring things full circle, we return to DC Comics, where starting with the dawn of DC, Superman has been restored to a more classic Silver Age suit across pretty much all mediums, including the current All-In era, which started in October 2024. For example, in titles like Superman and Action Comics, Clark wears the red cape, blue bodysuit, red trunks, yellow belt, and the iconic S-shield with a brighter blue and a slightly textured looser fit, evoking the optimism of the Silver Age and restoring the suit as a symbol of hope as Superman leads the reformed Justice League into a new era. However, while the All-In era has kept with the classic look in the main Superman titles, it's also introduced a bit of a contrast with the Absolute Superman book, which we talked about in the alternate version segment. This epic redesign by Rafa Sandoval is an AI-powered nanotech bodysuit with a high collar and no red trunks, reflecting a grittier Kryptonian-focused Superman. It's an amazing addition to the roster of Superman suits among the others we've seen over the years, but let us know which suit lands in the top spot for you down in the comments. But that brings us to our final piece in our ultimate history of Superman puzzle, and that is our essential reading recommendations for Superman, so let's get to it. For our number 10 pick, we have none other than Superman's first appearance in Action Comics 1 as well as Superman 1. The reason they're both on here is because they both establish the character and his origin for the very first time. On the first page of Action Comics 1, the comic wastes no time telling us as a distant planet was destroyed by old age, a scientist placed his infant son within a rocket ship, launching him towards Earth. He would land on Earth where a passing motorist would find the baby and turn him into an orphanage. As he got older, the alien boy discovered he had incredible powers. When he became an adult, Clark decided to use his powers to be a champion for mankind as Superman. Superman 1 would give us the origin we know now, with the one big change being that the elderly couple, the Kents, found baby Clark, adopting him as their own. What it all comes down to is without these two issues, we wouldn't have the Supes we know and love today, so they sit safely on this list. Next up, we have Superman Speeding Bullets. This is an Elseworld story that puts a fantastic twist on the Man of Steel. This comic tells the story of what would happen if baby Kal-El landed in Gotham City instead of Smallville, Kansas, and was found by the Waynes. The story then follows Batman's origin, but with Clark in Bruce's place, and it's fantastic. It quite literally gives us a Batman with Superman's powers, which is insane, and the way Clark unlocks his powers for the first time is amazing. You see, when his parents Thomas and Martha Wayne are gunned down by Joe Chill in Crime Alley, the stress and pain from the situation causes powers to emerge for the first time, activating his heat vision, at which point he melts Chill's face, killing him. Essentially, seeing Superman become Gotham's Dark Knight made for one of the best Superman stories to date. Okay, at number 8, we have For the Man Who Has Everything from Superman Annual 11. This story has become a timeless classic for DC and Superman, and that's simply because it's a brilliant yet simple plot. You see, it's Superman's birthday, so Batman, Robin, and Wonder Woman visit him at his Fortress of Solitude, but they find Supes in a catatonic state with a huge alien plant stuck to his chest. They soon find out this was done by the villain Mongol, who tells them the plant is called the Black mercy. It puts its victims in a deep coma-like sleep, making them dream of their heart's desires while simultaneously feeding off its victim's life force, or bio-aura, as Mongol explains. The story ends with Batman, Robin, and Wonder Woman saving Superman, and Robin trapping Mongol with the Black Mercy. It's just a well-done classic story, so much so it was adapted for an episode of Justice League the Animated Series, which was a fantastic adaptation. Next on the list is Superman 53. Now this issue is simply on the list because this is the first story that explains Superman's origin in great detail. His origin was briefly given to us on the first page of Action Comics 1, and then expanded upon a little bit, introducing the Kents in Superman 1, but Superman 53 introduced us to Krypton, Jor-El, and more, expanding upon why Krypton exploded and what the elves went through to save their only son before the planet blew up. We're also given a more detailed version of how the Kents found baby Kal-El and how they raised him over the years before he ultimately became Superman. This issue basically gave us the full Superman origin that we all know and love today, that's been retold several times throughout the years in all forms of media, and for that and that alone, it had to be on this list. Moving along, we have the epic Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow story by Alan Moore. See, around this time, DC was getting ready to say goodbye to the Silver Age version of Superman, rebooting Superman and many other characters with the Crisis on Infinite Earths event. So Alan Moore, being Alan Moore, wanted to tell the final story of Silver Age Superman, which ended up becoming Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow. And what we got was one of the best Superman stories ever told, as Moore was basically allowed to do whatever he wanted with Superman, as the character was going to be rebooted right after anyway. The story focuses on the last time we saw Superman, which was a decade ago, and in the present, Lois Lane tells us and a reporter the last time Superman was seen. And she recounts the revelation of the Man of Steel being Clark Kent to the public. It's a fantastic story that basically tells us why Superman is so important, honoring his Silver Age interpretation. Next, we have Kingdom Come by writer Mark Waid and artist Alex Ross. This is one of the most popular comic books of all time and classics in general. But at the heart of the story is Superman, as everything is basically revolving around him, which is not shocking, as Superman is the heart of the DC universe. I've been very vocal that I'm a way bigger Batman fan, but there is no denying that Superman is the center of DC. The whole premise of the story is Superman retires, which ultimately leads to other heroes abandoning the world for the next generation. But when he was forced to come out of retirement, so to speak, the heroes come back to help him clean up the mess that was created in their absence. And the way the story is told is a complete and utter masterpiece. Again, this isn't just one of the best Superman stories ever told, it's one of the best comic book stories ever told. But it just so happens that Superman is at the center of it, being the beacon of light and leader, which cemented its spot on our list. Now we have Superman for All Seasons by Jeff Loeb and artist Tim Sale. It's not shocking this is a staple Superman comic, as it was written by the creative team that brought us Batman The Long Halloween. The reason this book is so successful is because they essentially took the format they used for Batman The Long Halloween and gave it to Superman. You see, in Batman The Long Halloween, there's a murder on every holiday, and we follow Batman and his detective work gradually as the year progresses. And Superman for All Seasons does that, but on a larger scale, following Superman through the different seasons of his life. We get to see him growing up in Smallville, Kansas in great detail, showing us his interaction with his parents and Lana Lang, the first relationship from his youth. And of course, there's lots of Luthor and Lois Lane action as well. Basically, this series does a fantastic job of giving us a personal deep dive into the Man of Steel, including seeing his powers develop and how things as simple as getting a haircut became a big to-do, as normal scissors can't cut through the Man of Steel's hair. Simply put, this is one of the best Superman stories ever, as it gives us the perfect look into Clark's early days, but also how he deals with being the world's greatest hero. Here we have the death of Superman / reign of the Supermen story. This is the death and resurrection of Superman. Now today, killing superheroes and bringing them back is fairly commonplace, but back in 1992, it wasn't nearly as common as it is today. So when DC announced they were killing off their most famous and powerful superhero, it shocked the world and took it by storm. So much so everyone and their mother, whether they read comic books or not, were going to their local comic book shops, buying as many copies as they could. Besides the craze the death of Superman brought to the world, the story was just downright good and an instant classic. I mean, Superman 75 is still crazy. Basically, the entire issue is Superman going toe-to-toe in brutal fashion with Doomsday, the issue ending with both of them killing each other. Then the reign of Supermen, which followed, was also a banger, giving us several different versions of Superman trying to replace the Man of Steel, like Eradicator, Superboy, and Steel. But the last son of Krypton would eventually make his return in a black version of his iconic suit. All in all, the death and reign of Superman stories have to be on the top 10 of any Superman list. Next, we have Superman Red Sun. Much like Superman speeding bullets, this is an Elseworld storyline. Yet again, it tells the tale of what would happen if Superman landed somewhere else on Earth, besides Smallville, Kansas. In this case, Soviet Russia. For some reason, it's just super interesting to see how Kal-El would turn out, depending on where he landed in the world. This series also mirrored the real-world Cold War in a lot of ways, and also got the animation treatment in the Superman Red Sun animated movie, which was pretty good. The story is very compelling because Superman truly wants to help people, however, he's morally corrupted in the process. It's definitely a Superman story that makes you think, as there are several concepts that are based off of real-world realities. At number 1 is none other than All-Star Superman. This is the perfect Superman story, as it puts the Man of Steel, a god, essentially up against his own mortality. You see, in this story, we learn that Superman has recently absorbed so much yellow sun radiation, it's killing him. But before Superman dies, he sets out to make the world the best possible place he could. It's just one of the stories that shows why Superman is arguably the greatest superhero of all time. Because even when he's facing death, he's more worried about what will happen to the world when he's gone. It's masterfully written by Grant Morrison and perfectly drawn by Frank Quitely. Simply put, whether this is number 1 on your list or not, it has to be somewhere in the top 10. Alright, that wraps up our ultimate history of Superman, and we hope you had as much fun watching it as we had making it. Superman is the hero that started it all, and we couldn't be more excited about what James Gunn has put together for the movie, which we highly recommend you watch right here or at a B&B theater near you. They do such an amazing job of creating a super fun place to see the latest flick and just hang out. So huge thanks to B&B Theaters once again for hosting us and giving us the run of the place. You can lock in your Superman tickets at bnbtheaters.com. Other than that, we'll see you next time when we talk about all things comics.